The 2025 season just ended, but it's never early to look forward to 2026. We're talking about the Saints' upcoming opponents and more coming up today on the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. And welcome everyone to the latest edition of the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. Appreciate you listening in. If you haven't already, we'd appreciate it a lot if you would subscribe to the podcast today. That way you can stay up to date about your favorite teams across the state of Louisiana. And today, we are just wrapping up the 2025 season. We talked a lot about Tyler Shough, whether or not he's the long-term QB of the future. He's definitely going to be the QB1 heading into 2026. But I've got to throw out some way too early predictions. It's January 6th. We're not going to get to the start of the 2026 season until September. We don't even know when these teams are going to play, but we do know the Saints' opponents for next year. So why not have a little fun here and give my way too early predictions for the Saints' 2026 season? And I'll say this. This is the record I have is my glass half full point of view. I'm not going to give you all sunshine and rainbows, but I will give you as close to what I think the reality is for this Saints team right here, right now, considering everything going on. I think there's a lot of potential for a much better season. Now, whether or not that gets you to the playoffs is a different conversation, all depending on how the NFC South looks, because last couple of years, NFC South has just been an absolute dogfight. We saw that this year, week 18, a lot of middle of the road teams in the NFC South that were competing for a spot in the playoffs. So it's anybody's game, I think, heading into 2026, regardless of what happens with coaching hires, players leaving, and free agency. But I am going to start with the in-division teams. Obviously, they play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers twice, Atlanta Falcons twice, and Carolina twice. That's 6 of your 17 games in the 2026 season already mapped out. I think you wind up splitting versus Tampa, and then you sweep Atlanta, and you split versus Carolina. Again, I will continue to be a person that's like, I want to see the Saints sweep Atlanta every single year. You can split Carolina and split Tampa, just don't get swept by either of them. And I just feel like the NFC South, that split against Tampa is going to be a bit of a coin flip, maybe a little bit more of an optimistic point of view. I would not be surprised if Carolina could turn into getting swept, because Carolina has shown themselves they are getting better as time goes on with Bryce Young. Like you saw this season, that team was in worse shape than us to a certain extent. But they kind of locked in after that podcast kind of said, hey, we're taking a little bit of a break. And next thing you know, they wind up winning like several games while that podcast was like, yeah, we're done. And it's like, again, not really putting any blame or thanks on a podcast, but it is an interesting little wrinkle there. But I definitely feel like the Saints are going to wind up being, they will be 4-2 in division, which would be great, especially when it comes to the tiebreakers and things of that nature. I firmly believe that puts them in a really good position. I feel like it's definitely in the realm of possibility, especially when you look at Atlanta. Atlanta's trying to find a new head coach, new general manager, all these things. They're having to make a ton of front office changes. And before too long, you're going to also try to figure out what the hell are you going to do with some of the other guys. I just feel like this Falcons team is going to kind of regress towards below average in 2026, just based off of everything that I'm kind of getting purely off of vibes. Now we get to the other NFC opponents. And again, this all was released not long after the Saints lost to Atlanta in Atlanta. They'll be taking on the Green Bay Packers, the Arizona Cardinals, Minnesota Vikings, Chicago Bears, Detroit, and the New York Football Giants out of the NFC. They'll also be taking on AFC opponents at Cleveland, at Pittsburgh, at Las Vegas, at Baltimore, at Cincy. Like, so at the end of the day, you've got a lot of really good ball games on deck for 2026. And I have to say, I'm intrigued to see how everything goes. So I'll go with the other NFC opponents before I get into the AFC. And I'll explain my reasoning why with some of these. I think we get a loss against the Green Bay Packers, mainly because it felt like the last few years Green Bay has had this team's number. And also, I think Jordan Love is showing himself to be a really good quarterback, not elite like Aaron Rodgers was in his prime, Brett Favre was in his prime, but they've been able to kind of ride the storm out with him after the whole Aaron Rodgers fallout, and he's proven himself to be a very competent quarterback. I think that is going to cause some issues. So I'm going to go with a loss to Green Bay. Then you're going to be dealing with the Arizona Cardinals. I say that is going to be a win no matter what happens. They just fired their head coach. This team is just kind of in that weird purgatory state that the Saints are in right now. But I think they're in a worse off state. Yes, the Saints did lose to Arizona to start the 2025 season, but I still think that they are much better now than they were to start the season this year. Simply because of the fact that you have seen Tyler Shuck prove himself to be way better than the starting QB you had at the beginning of the year, and Spencer Rattler. And more importantly, I think that gives you a better chance in a game that was pretty much, if the ball bounced a different way, the Saints would have started off the season 1-0 and maybe even 2-0. And then we'd be having a whole different debate about Spencer Rattler and Tyler Shuck. But that's just how the ball bounces in the NFL. Then we go to the Minnesota Vikings. I feel like this one's going to be a loss, and it's kind of surprising when it comes right down to it, because the Vikings just don't necessarily scare me all that much compared to maybe a couple years ago. But I just feel like this team is going to be interesting heading into the 2026 season, especially a quarterback. Justin Jefferson is still going to be a weapon. I just feel like this defense is going to take a step back. Yes, Demario Davis said he's going to be back for 2026. Cam Jordan, TBD. I feel like a lot of those stalwarts, those vets on the defensive side of the football, especially the front seven, they are going to start to say, hey, we're going to go ahead and wrap up our careers in a nice little bow at this point. And now you are going to have to kind of rebuild, because that was one of the big positives for the New Orleans Saints this season. Whenever the offense wasn't performing, the defense was keeping them in a lot of these ball games. Outside of, I think, if we remember correctly, it was the Seahawks game and the first matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Those were the only games where they were really, truly outclassed from the word go. They had competitive games against the Buffalo Bills till, like, I'd say the third, fourth quarter. You got outclassed by the Seattle Seahawks. You kept it competitive against the 49ers and Cardinals. You kept it somewhat competitive against the Patriots. You kind of picked up the pace late in the game against the Atlanta Falcons, even though for the most part you definitely looked a little bit more kind of unsure about yourself in that contest. But I still feel like the defense carried this team to a few more wins than the offense did. I'm hoping that trend reverses in 2026, which is also why I'm kind of going more with a win in Chicago. But I am adding this caveat, since next season it will be on the road at Chicago's home base. If it's before the month of December, I firmly believe we see the Saints get a win. I just don't trust this team playing inside of an arena, an open air arena, in the month of December up in the Midwest and in the North. Like, I do not want to deal with an NFC North team that does not have a dome, because those elements are absolutely a mess. We saw it all the way back in 2006 when the Saints played Chicago in their first ever NFC title game. We've seen it time and again. The Saints may be a good team, but it feels like they shrink when it gets into those super cold, like late December games, even though it seems like more and more every year it becomes warmer and warmer. I know, I mean, it is January 6th when we're taping this podcast. Right now it's 69 degrees here in Louisiana. It's a nice temperature, but not what you think about when you think about the state of what winter weather typically should be. I'm wearing shorts right now. That is not conducive to winter weather, even though we did get a little bit of that, a little bit of a cold front during New Year's Eve. I digress. Then we get to a win over Chicago if the game is before December. If it's at the tail end of the season, I think Chicago gets the win. And then they lose to Detroit. I just feel like Detroit's a really good team. You know, Dan Campbell's going to want to have a little bit of vengeance and kind of just prove, hey, I should have been the guy you kept rather than, you know, have Dennis Allen be the guy. I feel like he has an axe to grind with this team. Don't get me wrong. And then you've got the New York Football Giants, the most dysfunctional team, I'd say even past the New York Football Jets, because it just feels like they're cursed at this point. The Giants just are dysfunctional. Every few years, they're having to fire a head coach. And they did it again at the end of the 2025 season, a little bit later than some of the other head coaches and teams parting ways with their guy, even though John Harbaugh, he got let go coaching the Baltimore Ravens when it felt like he was going to have that job for life. But lo and behold, he actually did get Das Boot because of a missed field goal on Sunday night. But I definitely feel like it's going to be a win against New York Giants. The Giants just have not shown much of anything to me. I'm hoping they can be better. But the last few years, you've been able to handle business against New York. Give me that win easily. And I'll start with the AFC opponents. I think it's going to be a loss to Cleveland. I feel like it's one of those, depends on time of year, but even then, I just feel like the Saints and Cleveland, the last few times these two teams have played, it has not been a great performance. I mean, I believe one year you were playing Johnny Football in one of his first ever games, and he dog walked you. Same thing with a lot of these rookie quarterbacks. You're probably going to wind up seeing, especially the Las Vegas Raiders. I do not want to deal with them week one. If I were booking the schedule, I'm putting that Las Vegas game midway through the season, bottom line. But I think you lose to Cleveland. I think earlier in the season, I think it's a loss. But I think if you go towards that second half of the season, based off of what we saw this past year, I think that could turn into a win. Then we go to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think that's a win because I firmly believe Aaron Rodgers is going to hang it up. If he doesn't, I feel like this game becomes a little bit more of a coin flip. But right here, right now, just based off of what I'm thinking, purely on vibes, as the kids say, I think we go with the Saints getting a win over the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I'm sure some of my friends over in the Steel City aren't going to be big fans of that prediction, but it is what it is. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to just make some predictions. Then we go over to other matchups in the AFC North. I think they lose to both Baltimore and Cincinnati. I understand they're going to be with a new head coach, but Lamar Jackson is still an absolute beast. And then you're also going to be dealing with Joe Burrow, Joe Shiesty. If he's still playing in the league, it feels like he may walk away from the sport that he loves and just kind of hang it up. If that's the case, I feel like the game turns on its head almost instantaneously, unless they wind up getting an absolute gem in the draft or in free agency. So I think they lose the other matchups against the NFC North teams besides Pittsburgh, just because I feel like Pittsburgh is going to fall back into the hierarchy in the North, just because I feel like Aaron Rodgers does retire at the end of the season. And then you got the Las Vegas Raiders. Again, I feel like they're going to win this game no matter what, just because the Raiders are the most dysfunctional team in the AFC. The NFC and the NFL, I think, goes to the great, and I mean that very sarcastically, the New York Football Giants. That team is an absolute mess. But I firmly believe that the Raiders, depending on who they get, I mean, they had Pete Carroll for one season, and it felt like he was next to useless there. just like the letter G in lasagna, this Raiders team is not going to be good. And I saw somebody bring it up, and I just highly doubt that ever happens, is the possibility of Lane Kiffin going back to the NFL to be with a team that pretty much has treated him like the number one hater. Like, they literally were like, yeah, this guy pretty much was the ultimate con man. And I also feel like Lane Kiffin won't do that to the LSU fan base. And I'll go ahead and kind of retcon some stuff I said yesterday about Lane Kiffin before we wrap things up here in just a moment. But I do want to kind of recap it here. Is with my way too early 2026 Saints predictions. I think there's a loss to Green Bay, win versus Arizona, loss versus Minnesota, win at Chicago if it's before December, loss against Detroit, win against the Giants, you split versus Tampa, sweep Atlanta, and split against Carolina. Then you lose to Cleveland, win to Pittsburgh if Rodgers retires at the end of the season, win at Las Vegas, lose against Baltimore, and lose against Cincy. Overall, I feel like the record for this Saints team in 2026 is going to be 9-8. I feel like that is the kind of most even keel opinion I can give about this team. 4-2 in conference, that's a great thing to have. But at the same time, I feel like 9-8 is the right level to where it's like, okay, now we can get one more draft in, and more importantly, hit on all of our picks. And I feel like playoffs are absolutely in the cards. But if this year's free agency and the draft goes a little bit better than maybe I'm expecting, I could easily see an 11-6 record, which would be fantastic to see that much improvement year over year. Because I think Kellen Moore is going to be given a fair shot, but at the same time, you have to believe that the Saints, are kind of looking at this and be like, all right, the clock is ticking to find the next person that we're going to have. And who's next, really? You know, when it comes right down to it, where are you going to be? But I will kind of wrap things up here talking about LSU football, because we're in the middle of the Sam Levitt sweepstakes, and it feels like it's more likely than not going to be LSU football's race to lose for the number one quarterback in the transfer portal, which would be a tremendous coup. We talked about it on the pod yesterday, how it felt like Lane Kiffin isn't hitting the high marks. He has a chance to do so in just one move, and this is a big get if this actually happens. Sam Levitt, former Arizona State Sun Devils quarterback, has been spending a lot of time over in BR. This comes off of a big stay he had over in Lexington with Will Stein and the Kentucky Wildcats over the weekend. And apparently, a lot of reports are saying he's extending his visit well into Wednesday. And it makes you wonder, will Miami, one of the other teams that's on the table, even get a chance to visit him? Because I was seeing some stuff, Matt Moscona's even saying, hey, you know, we feel like he's going to be the guy, and he's going to be coming over because he's hanging out with West Weeks, Whit Weeks, all these guys, kind of getting their names mixed up in my head. Again, when you have a bunch of W's in your name, kind of throws me off just a smidgen. But even Shea Dixon saying everything is coming up Millhouse for this team when it comes to the transfer portal, getting him there, and that would be absolutely huge. That said, I feel like the other point this LSU team and Lane Kiffin needs to make is to focus in on getting some good offensive linemen. That was one of your worst points this past season. Kern, one of your shining stars for most of the season, he has been entering the transfer portal. He's headed over to Ole Miss. So you've got to kind of rebuild that offensive line and make sure it can get better before too long. Because if it doesn't matter if you have the second coming of Joe Burrow there. That quarterback's got to stay healthy in order to win some football games. Just my opinion. Appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you tomorrow on a 3 and Out Thursday. Till then, we'll talk to you later.